So what is BFE? So we know the term base flood elevation, but where does it come from and what does it mean? So base flood elevation is the flood having a 1% chance of being equal or exceeded in any given year. It's also known as the 100-year floodplain or the special flood hazard area. Those are all three the same terms. So what does that 1% mean? That 1% means if I have 100 marbles in a bag, 99 of them are white and one of them is red, my chance of drawing that marble out, that red marble, is what? 1%. What it does not mean, and you hear a lot of people say this, is I'm going to get a flood there every 100 years. You hear people say that all the time. People come into the office all the time and go, hey, I'm looking at buying this parcel of property. It flooded last year, so I know I'm good for another 98 years. I'm like, you obviously haven't sat through the class, and maybe we can have a little refresher here. It does not mean that you're going to flood only once every 100 years. It's the 1% chance of flooding. It's the same as the 100-year floodplain, and it's the same as the special flood hazard area. Now, don't get confused along the way. Oh, go ahead. Question.
Who determines the BFE?
That the BFE is determined through the science that's based into the topographic study. A lot of the floodplain maps are based on topo sheets. They used to always be based on field surveys, things like that. Now they're using radar for a lot of that to be even more precise. But a lot of the general big picture originalities were based on topographic sheets that says, hey, I know this area is low. I know this area accumulates X number of X amount of water. I mean, they're flood maps. That's why the whole country isn't mapped. It's a pretty distinct science. You know, it's not just somebody driving through on a rainy day going, oh, there was water there, you know, and making up numbers.
Like, I'm just thinking, after Sandy, there's this area in Jersey called Belmar, and they're making anyone that was substantially damaged build at, let's say, 10 feet plus 1 foot of freeboard. So I'm just trying to understand, when they're saying 10 feet, is the water going to go up to 10? Like, I'm just trying to understand. And
that's what the BFE is determined, that's the safe height that you need to build at.
So that water doesn't come to your home.
Exactly.
So
and then your local ordinance is what gets to add the freeboard requirement.
Yeah. And that's actually the town that's implementing that. That's not, you know, like the FEMA came back and said, okay, you got to build at 10 feet. 2 feet.
And your freeboard requirement can range anywhere, because currently in Hillsborough County we have a 6-inch freeboard requirement. There's 1 or 2 communities in the Panhandle that have a 4-foot freeboard requirement.
Freeport on Long Island has 3 foot. It's the only one on the island.
Yeah. So I mean, that varies, and that's what bothers a lot of people. They're building something in one community, then they go to another one. They're like, "Why? Your freeboard is incredible." Well, that's what's been determined, and that's what's been passed by local ordinance, with the idea of preventing flooding.
So basically, the BFE, they're saying you got to build at 10 feet, and they feel that you have to be 10 foot above the base flood in order to be safe.
Yeah, that's the idea. That we know that previous studies have shown that this is the given height, whatever that number may be, that you should construct that to not undergo any flooding. Now, where you run into the difficulty is contractors, developers, and everybody else want to say, well, it's 10 feet, I want to build right at 10 feet. They don't want to go any freeboard, they don't want to go any extra, because they're like, well, if somebody told me 10 feet, that's all I want to do. Even though we know floodplain X, for example, whether it's shaded or unshaded, we know floodplain X is basically outside of the floodplain. But what do we also know about floodplain X? Every year, something like 25% of the insurance claims are from homes in floodplain X. Going right back to that animation we saw where the water crossed the line, and everybody's like, no, it shouldn't do that, it should stop right there. Well, guess what? Just because you're in the X flood zone doesn't mean you're not going to flood. Yeah, there is lower risk. Can I buy flood insurance in the X zone? Absolutely. Yeah, no one will ever say, and people get confused with that. People are like, oh, you can't buy flood insurance. Sure you can. You can buy flood insurance anywhere. Is flood insurance cheaper in the X zone than it is in the velocity zone?
Yes.
Absolutely. There's less risk. But when we know that 20 to 25% of the claims every year occur in places that are outside of the special flood hazard area, you know, we see the same thing with the windborne debris area where we live. The building code says you've delineated a line on the map folks on the coastal sideline or in the windborne debris region, they have to have impact glass or put shutters on their windows. People on the other side of the line do not. We'll get people that live in, it's a road. We'll get people that live on that side of the road and go, oh, thank goodness, I don't have to put shutters on my home. I'm outside of the region. I'm like, you're just across the street. The wind's not going to stop right on the road. By the same comparison, it doesn't stop right at that AEX line.
Real quick, back to the building to the base flood elevation, isn't it different between A zones and B zones? Like A zones is the actual floor that you stand on, B zones is the structure?
Absolutely. And we'll talk about that too. So, his question, if you didn't hear his question is, are the construction standards different between the A zone and the V zone, velocity zone? And they sure are. And we'll talk about that from some of the graphics we see that you use in the elevation certificate, just to the types of construction and the elevation of the house. A great reference for some of this is the FEMA Coastal Construction Manual that has some great information for what kind of practices, procedures, foundations, development is used for constructing on the coast. And we'll also see in the elevation certificate where we take that measurement, where our base flood elevation, finished floor, lowest horizontal member, whatever we want to call it, we'll explain that when we get there, is taken and put on the elevation certificate. So when I determine BFE, BFE should be determined from the flood insurance study profile. So wait a minute, this whole time I've been saying BFE is on the maps, the firm, and now you're telling me it's on the flood insurance study. Just for this very reason. Flood insurance rate maps depict accurate information, but they are rounded to the nearest foot, while the flood insurance study profiles are not. So be clear when you're answering questions, whether it's a test question, whether it's a consumer question, whether it's a client question. Hey, I just want to know what my general number is on the firm. That's where I look it up and say, hey, it's 7 feet. But if I look it up in the flood insurance study in the profiles, it actually may be 6.8 feet or 6.9 feet. So be clear, if somebody's asking you for like the regulatory BFE, that's different from then if somebody just wants to know, hey, what's my general base flood elevation on the firm?
So when they're asking where is the BFE determined from, it is determined from the flood insurance study.
Correct. It also appears on the firm, but the firm is a rounded number.
Gotcha.
Yeah, with typical rounding standards. So it's important to be clear on that our most accurate and our detailed number comes out of the FIS, even though the firm still has a number to it. So there's our flood insurance study. If you're not familiar with that, you should be, because being able to use the flood insurance study, know what it's all about, and rest assured, we're going to run through it in about a half hour, but it won't give you all the information you need, but it gives you a pretty good idea of what to look for and how to use it.
I saw that was like 38 pages.
Yeah, it is. So that's we're going to cover 38 pages in like 15, 20 minutes. But all flood insurance studies are basically broken down the same way. They give you a history, they give you how the analysis was done, they give you a geographic description. So any flood insurance study you pick up, the indexing, the layout is the same. That doesn't mean the pages are the same, but the general format is the same. It includes information such as depth, velocity. What's velocity? Velocity is the speed of the water, yeah. In the flood history, it's used in conjunction with the firm. You'll see we use these profiles, the flood insurance study, the flood insurance rate maps. They're all used in conjunction with one another. No single document, no single paperwork is to stand alone. It's like you never say, hey, I got all my information from this, or I got all my information from this. We use those in conjunction. And we use that to determine the BFE. Included in our flood insurance study is the range of Mannings end values used for the channel and overbank areas. Don't worry, we're not going to make engineers out of you, unless, is anybody already an engineer? Anybody a PD? Oh, well, there you go. So we don't have to make, you can try to make engineers out of me. I am not an engineer. But it goes to the aspect of Mannings end where we're talking about the resistance. Now, rest assured, you're not going to have to calculate any resistance. You're not gonna have to calculate any of that in the channel flow. What you do need to know is recognize how that value is used for determining aspects such as the velocity. Yeah, Mannings N basically defines the resistance like in a channel, whether it's concrete, tall grass, rocky bottom, mud, and we'll see a graphic of it. As I said, you don't need to worry about calculating, you don't need to know what the actual numbers mean, just to know that that's what results in how we determine how fast the water is going to move through a channel. A flood insurance study establishes the flood elevation profiles, usually 10, 50, 100, 500 year section. And this is the only place to find the 500-year event data. You know, we talked about those shaded, unshaded areas on the firm. Well, the only place to find the real data for those 500-year areas is in the FIS. Anybody need a little bit more time for this slide? Mannings N is the resistance in the channel. That's the engineering calculation that is used to determine what, and the resistance being by what's on the stream bottom. Whether it's tall grass, short grass, concrete, rocks, mud, gravel, you name it. Every item has a resistance value to it that can either, well, it all impedes the water flow. Some of it impedes the water flow greater than others. You know, if I have tall grass, it's going to slow down the water more than smooth concrete will. A very important term we need to understand is the floodway. The regulatory floodway is the channel of a river or other water course in the adjacent land areas that must be reserved in order to discharge the base flood without increasing the water surface elevation more than a designated height. Right now you're saying, wow, that's a lot to remember, it's kind of confusing. Guess what, I'm going to show you a graphic that makes it a lot easier. Yeah. So I'll give everybody a minute to copy some notes down, and then we'll look at the picture and get an idea. And I can always come back to this. And as I said before, I'm going to be here tomorrow too, because I'm proctoring the exam. So if you think of anything tonight, we plan for a 2-hour review session in the morning tomorrow, so we'll run that almost like this open forum, so feel free to bring questions. And if you want to see any of these again, I can bring it back up for you. So here's the graphic. I'm a picture person. I like seeing graphics and things. This is the easy way to understand it. So this is my floodway. So this is, now visualize, this is my river or stream flow in this direction. It's a cross section. It's a profile, cross view. Here's my stream channel, here's my water level, here's the one bank, here's the other bank. So each one of these, so my floodway is the area where my water always is, essentially. And that's defined by here. So here's the area where my water always is, and that's my floodway. So the areas on either side of the floodway we call the flood fringe, or the floodway fringe. They're the fringes on either side of that main channel. Now, what do you notice about these two fringes?
You have different height.
They have a height, and they're also not symmetrical. They do not need to be symmetrical. A lot of people always confuse it. They're like, but they're not even on the same side. They won't be. Does anybody go canoeing? If you've ever gone canoeing down meandering rivers, you have the slip-off slope and the cut-off slope and some of these huge built-up sandbars and some of the deep part. Almost every river is like that. Most rivers are not symmetrical, so don't let it confuse you when you see an uneven area. It still counts the fringe and the floodway and the fringe on each side. Altogether, that is my 100-year floodplain. The general idea here is if this area floods over, where does that water go? It goes up over the fringe area.
Does the floodway also protect the fringe? Will they always delineate between the fringe and the floodway? Because I've seen the documentation when they say floodway, sometimes they're talking about from fringe edge.
Well, and they have to define that. And one of the things, that brings up a good point, one of the things to remember about this is not limited by scale. So this here, say it's a Mississippi River, that could be a mile wide, then each one of these fringes could be another mile or two wide. Don't always depict that small little river running behind grandma's house that has water in it to this level. This could be that fringe, to be that floodplain, this could be miles across. So here's our fringe, here's our floodway, here's our fringe. Now, can I build something in the floodway? Am I allowed to build in the floodway?
Yes.
True or false? How many say true? How many say false? Those of you that said false, you should have said true. You can indeed build in the floodway. There's nothing from the NFIP that says you can't. But guess what? We really discourage it. We don't want people building in the floodway. They can, but we really try to discourage that. If they do want to construct something in the floodway, what do we require of them to submit? You ever heard the term no rise? Now there's no specific certificate. FEMA does not have a no rise certificate. The no rise is an engineering study performed by an engineer that determines anything that's built in this area is not going to cause the water to rise. So they named it a no rise. What a novel concept. They basically said, hey, you're going to generate this study and we're going to determine that by you building something there, and think about it, it's me saying I have this river flowing, if I build something there that displaces some water at some point in time during a flood event, is it going to cause the water to rise for other locales? Well, it is, but what I want my no-rise study to delineate and to show me is that it's not going to rise to a certain maximum that's going to affect other structures, property, or people in that area. That is the term surcharge. What by the NFIP is the maximum rise of surcharge allowed? 1 foot. And now we're going to turn all this back into a map reading skill here pretty soon when we see the floodway on a map. The important things to remember in this is we basically taken this definition, kind of arduous, kind of cumbersome, and turn it into this picture. A little bit easier to remember.
Okay, so I can also build in the encroachment area. Okay, I can build in the encroachment area as long as I'm not increasing the floodway no more than 1 foot. Or
Correct.
per county regulation, whatever. But
Well,
I can also,
be clear on that though. The 1 foot is a FEMA regulation.
all right, but if I build in the floodway, say I want to go beyond the encroachment, build in that floodway, I can't have any rise.
Correct.
No rise if I build in that. It has to be federally.
But you're still, let's see right here, the surcharge is not to exceed 1 foot or lesser. So I can say it's 6 inches if I want to in my state. That's why you supply the no rise. If you build something there, the water's going to rise. It has to. The water, you're displacing something.
Right, so why the no rise? Why not say rise no more than 1 foot? No
Well,
rise doesn't really.
Well, they call it a no rise because the idea is you're delineating how much the surcharge is going to be
It's
raised.
confusing because again, you can encroach as long as you don't increase. But when they talk about building in the floodway, there's a no rise that's meant zero to me. But it's really no more than 1 regardless of whether I'm building in the floodway or I'm building in a road.
Correct. Because the idea is you're trying to show that whatever you're constructing is not going to raise it more than 1 foot. Now you notice here that the 1 foot is the FEMA requirement. Your state could have less. There are some areas that have a 0 no rise, which is saying just what you said, which means, so instead of, and I think they've done some of that on the Mannings, because if I tell somebody you can't build in the floodway at all, they're going to be like, hey, that's my property. You're taking my property from me. These are my rights. But then if you say, hey, you can build there, but you can't have any rise, then somebody's stuck with saying, well, how am I going to build this where there's no rise? It may have to be an elevated structure. I may have pilings or piers, and that's the only element that's in there, and then maybe an engineer can calculate and say, okay, that won't cause the water to rise in. But otherwise, if I stick a structure, if I stick a slab on grade structure right here, as the water hits it, it's displacing some water. Whether it's inches or feet is dependent on the size of the structure. What's the other thing when we talk about some structures? Anybody know what the other calculation that we work on? Starts with a B. We want to make sure the building doesn't float. We do buoyancy calculations. And those are important when we talk about flood-proofing a structure. And we'll mention that in a little bit. The idea, if I'm going to flood-proof a structure to make sure water doesn't come in, I also have to make sure it's not going to float away. So as I said, this becomes this in a little bit easier format to see, in a graphic format. So, next quiz question of the day. Does anybody know what the bottom of the stream channel is called? Close.
Twilight or something like that.
Close. It's the Floodway. Believe it or not, that's one of those little trivial things. I challenge you to try to.
All the way to Missouri.
I challenge you to try to incorporate that into your next party conversation. Good luck if you can do that. So it's the lowest point at the bottom of the stream channel. So the floodway data table, and we're going to see how these correspond to our map reading, which we've already touched upon. The floodway data table provides information for each cross-section. Things like the distance, which is the stationing, the cross-section width, the cross-section area, the mean velocity of floodway flow in FPS, which is what?
Feet per second.
Feet per second, at the cross-section, and the BFE at the cross-section, and the increase at the identified cross-section. So those are all the important things that we're going to see in the floodway data table. What document is the floodway data table in? Flood insurance study, yeah. We use those, what's that?
You gave me a dirty look. I studied.
We use those in conjunction. The map and the flood insurance study are your friend because you've got to use them in conjunction to answer a lot of, not just the test questions, but our general knowledge, general information of floodplain management comes from both. If you're ever in a municipal office seeing the floodplain manager or something and all they get out is the map and they don't get out the study, I would challenge what their actual data is going to be, because the study gives us all this information that the map doesn't necessarily tell us. Think about it. If I look at the map, I've got the geographical, the geospatial information, but I don't have all these specifics. So if I want to know the specifics of a cross-section, and I look at the map, I'm like, I want to know the details of what's right there. If somebody's looking at buying a piece of property and they point on the map saying, I'm buying this and here's the cross-section, I need to be able to use the flood insurance study to be able to generate that information. So here's our floodway data table. Hydraulic analysis represented each cross-section. I'll bring a larger picture up for you. Now the important thing to remember when we're using these, it's kind of blocked out by the bottom of the screen here, but make sure you're using the proper data table for the actual water body or river that you're using. See how this one says Rocky River? For every study performed for a given area on a given firm, there's an individual data table for that specific floodway. So don't just assume that the first one you get to covers all the rivers on that map. There's more than one. In this case, it's Rocky River. And we have this highlighted because this is the regulatory. So if somebody asks you for the regulatory BFE, what do you think that number is if I look at the firm? 10. Because it's rounded up, so it's 10 on the firm. But if somebody says, I want the accurate regulatory number, I want to give them 9.9.
And that would be the flood insurance study, same number.
Correct. Yeah, because that's where this comes out of, the flood insurance study. So, and we'll see how these tie into this cross-section on the map. If I read the map, that's going to tell me 10. It's correct, it's just a rounded number. But if somebody says, well, I want the regulatory number because I'm really cheap, I don't want to spend any more money on elevating the structure than I have to, what's the minimal I can build at? 9.9.
So what are the with and without floodway numbers?
Oh, we'll cover those. So if I ask you, or if I look in here, is this cross-section in the floodway. If it's without a floodway, it's typically the same. It's not always the same. It's typically the same as our regulatory BFE. If I'm in the floodway, they've rounded them up here, but notice some are the same. And then this goes to what our increase is, or what our elevation increase is for that amount. And then we'll look and see in a minute where these respond or where these relate to every specific cross-section. So when we talk about this analysis, we've heard the term cross-section before. It's important to remember cross-sections cover riverine areas, rivers and inland. Transects are for coastal. So this whole time we're talking about riverine, we're talking about cross-section. I've got something that's delineating a river, a stream, some kind of water body that's inland. If I'm talking about on the coast, it's a transect. So here's our cross-section. So when we look at this, and we're going to look at these in detail, so don't feel that this is the only slide. But here's our same basic delineation we just saw, the floodway. Here's our fringes. You'll see these lines drawn on here, and I'll explain what those are. So here's our floodway. Here's our fringe area. What is that whole area called if I go from one fringe, including the floodway, and the other fringe?
100 years.
That's my 100-year floodplain. That's my whole floodplain area. We see our 1 foot max surcharge. So this is the profile of it. So guess what? This is this on the firm. And this is this in the floodway data table. So when we look at all these different graphic representations, if I look at each one of these on one piece of paper and I'm not relating it to the other two, it's kind of way out there. Like, where is this coming from? What is this used for? But all these are the same thing in just 3 different methods.
Your floodway is between the 2 solid red lines, right?
Correct. And on this map, here's my 2 solid red lines.
Yeah.
Well, obviously they're not straight because the river's not straight. But we have our cross-hatching delineation from the floodway, and we'll see that again. And how did we know that was the cross-hatching delineation that's on the floodway?
It's on the.
It's on the legend in the map, and we're going to look at that again. But if there was any confusion, I would just look back at the legend and go, hey, that's how that works. So this is this right here. So when we talk about cross-sections, we've heard that term several times.
Cross-section.
There's our cross-section. On the firm, on the flood insurance rate maps, cross-sections are always shown in hexagons. And they always start with letters. I say start because they go A through indefinite, however many cross-sections there are. If you have more than 26, it would restart at AA. I haven't really seen too many where you have more than 26. But they're always lettered, and that's essentially what it is. It's a cross-section of that river or stream.
The point between the 2 A's is the 100-year floodplain.
Correct. So if I had this fringe, I don't want to say the point between the 2 A's, because if I measure it on the map, I'm not measuring the line here, I'm measuring the red lines here.
Between the 2 little red lines.
Correct. Yeah. So here's my floodway, here's my fringe, here's my other fringe. So essentially between this red line and this red line is my 100-year floodplain. So it's just like what you said. I just don't want to say it's between my 2 A's because I don't want somebody to measure. If somebody says, what's the width of the floodway here, don't measure from A to A, measure from line to line. So we just said that on the map, the cross-sections are in hexagons. So what are my lines showing here? Guess what? That's the cross-section in the data form on the floodway data table. So A, delineated here, is A on this table. If you just look at the map, or you just look at the floodway data table, sometimes it can be unclear. If you put them all together, hopefully it starts to tie together. Yes?
I have a question for you. Wouldn't it be the little black lines on the outside?
Her question was, would it be the little black lines on the outside?
Like to measure the 100-year?
For measuring the 100-year, you could, and this is kind of a quote gray area, sorry, no pun
Okay.
intended, only because right here we show zone X unshaded. So yeah, so you're right. So if you wanted to really follow the exact detail, you'd say it's from the black lines.
Okay.
Here they have this zone X or zone B unshaded, delineated by that. On many maps, you may not have that because you may not necessarily. It goes back to what Kurt asked.
Well, yeah, zone B though is between 1 and 5.
Correct.
It's shaded. If it's saying zone X is unshaded, but it's a B, so that's counterintuitive.
Only because each side, here they've determined each side of this stream area is different. And not, and that's one of those where that goes to the depth of almost like, what's it look like in real life? What's the topography? What were the historical events?
The information you need will reference table A, and there's your distance and everything that you need right across the table.
Correct. And I totally see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Your debate and point goes like PhD material. You know, if somebody asked you that, that's the kind of stuff you could write a dissertation on how any specific area was deemed a B unshaded X versus C unshaded X for a specific area of geography. You had a question too, didn't you?
Yeah, I pretty much answered it. I was just wondering which red lines you meant when you were doing your measurements.
Yeah, this was the floodway, and she's actually,
Fringe
she's
to
got
fringe?
she's got the exact point here. If I wanted, I'd want from the edge of the fringe.
Everything inside the fringe is a 100-year floodplain. Outside of it would be.
It could be, yeah, it could be this kind of thing here,
Just based on
unshaded
the-
X, B.
Would that be the
Okay.
500
Yeah.
year? Would that be the
Yeah.
500 year zone
Okay.
then?
No, it's not
Designation.
code 500 year zone.
It could be 500 year, but it's not always 500 year. Because that's essentially what Kurt's asking, is it always a 500? And that's going to depend on how
How
they have
floods
it.
would be
My
correct.
mistake, I'm bold.
Wow. And that goes to how they have it deemed as shaded or unshaded.
That gray area again.
Yeah. We're talking about some really finite analysis and details to get to that point, though. But the idea here is to show that when you have that cross-section, it relates specifically to that cross-section on the data table. So, say for example right here, if I wanted to know the exact width, like his question was, if I wanted to know the exact width of that cross-section, what do? Do I measure that?
No, you
115.
gotta look right there.
Yeah, exactly.
There are no scale rulers here.
Right. We don't have to measure it. If somebody knows, I want to know the exact width of that cross section, I'm going down here and I'm saying it's 115 feet wide. Yeah.
So if we were to get a question like this in the exam, we will be giving this information to answer it?
Well, yeah, they give you the map, the flood insurance
Okay.
study and everything. But I mean, that's a viable question. Somebody could say, what's the width of cross section A?
I don't know.
Don't feel that like, oh my gosh, they didn't give me a ruler. What do I do here? I'm lost. We don't need a ruler. But that's when you have to know that you have to go to the floodway data table in the flood insurance study to get that number. And there it is, right there.
What is the distance?
115. in
No,
feet.
that's the width. What's the number to the left?
Oh, the distance, we'll see that in a minute. That's the distance down
Downstream, right?
the stationing. Yeah, because you can't see it from this picture, but we'll see where the B's and C's are. So as you go downstream, you'll see subsequent cross sections. Now, the one thing I will caution you on that is you have to make sure you notice what the superscript is, because it may not always be in feet. If we're talking about a large-scale map, it may be in miles.
It may be a mile,
Yeah. So here you notice they say width in feet, but if we're talking about a large-scale map, that may be miles downstream. So don't just assume it's feet. And I would almost assure you that this one isn't in feet because it says 4.3 and then B is at 5.5. That would mean the cross-section is right here, and do we see that? No. So distance very well could be miles downstream.
Distance from,
one point to the
right, from A to B, B to C.
And good, that's a good question. It's not distance from point to point. This is distance from the original stationing.
Oh.
And that'll tell you where it's either at the confluence, where the river is
We'll know
defined.
where that point is.
Yeah,
Okay.
there may be a reference mark, there may be a benchmark,
Okay.
and that's all delineated. I mean, there's no way you can ever
Right.
guess at that, but it'll tell you where that's at.
Okay.
So on the flood insurance study that I printed out for
Flood count.
USA, it does, Jim just noticed, it does say on here, delineates down here, feet above county boundary. Oh, that's,
Is it feet above county boundary, or is it feet in distance from?
it says feet above county boundary.
As the
Yeah, and that actually may be an error, because think about it, if you have this one here, if your distance is downstream is 4 feet, your next one's not gonna be 5 feet, it'll be right next to it. Yeah, that superscript, actually, it might, supposed to say miles, whatever the increment was.
Mike, I got a
So
question
tell
for
me
you.
that.
Should we have?
Yeah,
those-
it'll say that.
Should we have picked those up on the back table or?
What's that? If you wanna grab one, in fact, I think we're probably supposed to take a break soon anyway.
2:30, Mike, if you're ready, yeah.
Yeah, you wanna do that, pick one up, because a lot of this now, we're gonna start talking about maps and all that. Pick those up, start to familiarize yourself.